Hey Phil, what's happening, man?
Happening, man, a lot, man. I bet a lot. It's going
What's happening?
crazy right now. Everything is changing, right?
100%. We're both very tired because we're getting slammed.
Yep,
There's a reason
yep,
why.
yep.
The
So tell me,
market,
man, what's new with the new change, with the new first homeowner change?
yeah, this is a big episode, man. So today we're going to cover, just to your point, the new
Yep,
person bias scheme. It was always coming from the election, always meant to be January 1st, but last week, massive bombshell news. It's been pulled forward to the 1st of
yep,
October.
yep,
So big news. So basically, like just to rewind and make people understand what this means for the market, essentially, the first-time buyer's grant, you now have the access to buy a property with a 5% deposit, get your stamp duty exemptions, get LMI exemptions, and there's no number of limit to the people who can access the grant. So before it was
yes,
like 35,000 people, and now you can pretty much open it to all the markets. So anyone who's never bought their own home before, who's renting currently, the floodgates are about to open because they can come in and really start to buy properties without having to save years for a deposit.
yep,
On top of that, there's no income cap, so you could be earning literally $1 million a year and still use that scheme. And the price caps for every city have kind of increased. So we're going to talk about that. And then
mm,
I'll just go into a bit of a deep dive with you, just what's happening across the
yep,
market, capital city
yeah.
breakdown. But let's start with that first time buyers grant, man. What are you seeing? What have you heard? What kind of demand?
Yeah. So prior to it actually getting announced, there obviously, as you said, people knew about it. We were expecting it in January, and the market was kind of planning for January. People's thoughts were January. People thought they had a little bit more time because, obviously until the ends of the month before it really starts to react. I think one of the biggest things that I think is underlooked at is that limit for actual income, the cap. Because prior to that, I actually had a few clients that were thinking of buying their first home and just decided to go the investment route because they were over that cap, right? So they had really good salaries. They just weren't in the property market just as yet, and that cap was ruling them out, right? Because this was focused on allegedly more lower income people.
Yeah.
But with so many people coming from overseas with crazy salaries, right? And that's not what the only reason is, but that helps a lot of people that have come from overseas with a lot of money, with great jobs that want to get into the market and move and settle in Australia.
Yeah.
This is really good for them because it was really unfair for someone to move to Australia with, a great certificate, working a great job. And
Mhm.
just because their income was really high, they weren't able to actually get into the market. And they were kind of still behind first time owners, which that was a little bit unfair for some people, right? I
Yeah.
know some people might say, well, these guys are making a lot of money, like they don't need the help, but it isn't as simple as that because at the end of the day, that 30 to 40K difference in income that's over that cap, you've completely destroyed that client out of the market. And the people that are under that cap have so much more competitiveness against them, which really isn't fair, right? I think the same things apply what we were speaking about before. This isn't a loophole for investors to try to get into, right? This is really for people that actually want to get in there. And I think the fact that they moved it from 10% to 5%, I think is really good. That's going to really help people be a lot more competitive against investors.
Yeah.
Because with these lower rates, investors can sometimes be better off because they're able to take more risks and extend themselves more. So obviously, when you're versing people that are investors versus actually wanting to live in it, having that 5% deposit makes a big difference, plus the income cap. So you can have two young couples, right? You're not going to force one of them to take less money just to kind of get into this cap, which is really, really good, I think.
Yeah. And you mentioned some amazing points, and I just thought of it as floodgates are going to open. So,
Yes.
like, I'll give you real life examples of what we saw on the day of the announcement and the day after. We were
Yeah.
negotiating on properties, so we were purchasing across the country. These two properties are in Perth, for example. We're negotiating just around the $700,000 mark. Overnight, selling agents called me back in the morning, the day after the announcement, and they're saying, hey, look, our sellers are aware that this announcement is now taking place. They understand the implications. We were talking around that $700,000 mark for a property. They're now on $40,000 more. And that's
Wow.
overnight sentiment. So you mentioned again, like obviously from an affordability point of view, things are going to increase. So I've got some data here that will really help paint the picture as to
Mm,
the amount of more people coming to the market.
mm.
So the key here is affordability. If you
Yeah.
look around Australia, it's been very difficult for, the new generation to buy property, even for, people today to save up for even a 10% deposit in Sydney, for example. It's historically taken more than 10 years. So
Yeah.
here's some crazy data. Right now in Sydney, before the announcement, it used to take around 13 years for someone to save up for a 20% deposit. to buy a home at the median price point. After the announcement, 5% deposit, it will now take 3 years. In
Wow.
Melbourne, it used to take 9 years. It will now take 2 years. In Brisbane, 11 years, now going down to 3 years. Adelaide, 12 years down to 3 years, and Perth, 10 years down to 3 years. So basically, if I look at all capital cities, the major capital cities anyway, you're looking at 10 plus years to save up for a 20% deposit, going down to just 3 years. And then there's no amount of people, there's no restriction to the amount of people that can access this grant. So think
Mm.
about all the people currently renting, and renting is not easy today by any means. There's a massive rental shortage as well. All these people waiting to buy properties, just being priced out for however
Yeah.
so many years, are now going to storm into the market from October 1st, while the price caps have increased across every single city. So they're
Yes.
not like restricted to the lower end, properties that probably no one wants to live in anyway. They now can buy properties in the right locations. And if you look at Sydney, within $1.5 million, there's so many deals you can get
Yeah.
with metro access, decent sized block, good home. You're not going to be living in a location you're not happy with. And especially if you go down to Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide,
Mm.
Melbourne, under that cap, you're within 35, 40 minutes maximum of CBD. Even in the newer developments, new amenities, new schools, new shopping centers, all this is gonna just explode, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we've just been contacting every client that's in the market or are going to be in the market over the next 2, 3 months, or even looking for the next property next year, because in all honesty, the prices aren't going to stay the same. They're going to move higher. They're going to move significantly higher. So if you look at the price caps, where the markets we're buying in today, we're always buying well under the first home buyers grant anyway. But now we anticipate those same markets to quickly accelerate to those price caps because of the demand we're going to see.
Mm.
And I want to ask you, man, like, while this is great for short-term affordability, so I think it's going to help a lot of people get into the market right now. It's going to
Yes.
help a lot of people that were basically scared they'll never buy their own home, afford their home in the next maybe 1 or 2 years, which is amazing. But
Mm.
I feel this is honestly going to be more of a band-aid solution. This government stimulus is going to be very short-term band-aid solution because ultimately these prices are going to rise really quickly.
Yes.
And unfortunately, there's still not enough supply to kind of cater for that demand that we're going to keep seeing, whether it's from internal migration, external migration, or the amount of new demand from first-home buyers. There's just no
Mm.
supply. So
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
that challenge, prices are just going to blow off the top in the next 2, 3 years. And what's
Mm.
going to happen then? I think they'll have to make more amendments to this policy because that supply factor just isn't changing. So I
Yeah.
think this is more of a short-term band-aid solution. It's going to make properties more unaffordable after like the first year or two, in my opinion. What do you
Yeah.
think about that?
So yeah, like you said, the catch thing is great that it's gone down to 3 years to actually afford a home, right?
Yeah.
But let's not pretend that any house from basically Auburn and Sydney all the way west hasn't gone up an extra 150K because of this grant that's being under that cap, right? And as you said, with a lot of investors, they're looking around that 800 mark. They don't really too often spend more than that. So for Sydney, as an example, you've already probably lost 100 grand because of this, right? And then if you take it out to Brisbane, Perth, Melbourne, as you were saying, with those caps, with those investors actually competing against you, we're just making the investors pay more. That's really what's happening at the end of the
Mm.
day. Like, sure, the client is able to get into the property, right, with that 5% deposit, which is great, but everything has become more expensive now, and you are still competing against people, as you said, as a band-aid fix, right?
Mm.
And I was raving about that cap income and get removing that. But obviously with that gone now, and obviously with rules constantly changing, it's very dynamic. So it's only going to push things up. And there's nothing to say that it's easier to build because none of these policies are really helping people investing. Right. You hear a lot of people saying, oh, why don't we just get rid of negative gearing? Right. When we tried that, rents skyrocketed. And Australia comparatively has very, very good rent compared to our prices because of negative gearing.
Yeah.
For people like us as investors, if I wanted to buy a property, I might be less lenient on trying to construct new homes just because I got to wait so long. I've got to pay so many approvals. The supplies are not there. Why don't I just pay a buyer's agent, just go get anywhere in Brisbane and just compete with the people that are trying to actually live in there? I don't really have that incentive to really go out there, find a builder. Can you build me this house? Because the builder's costs are so high where there isn't much meat for anyone. So without these things, it actually can be worse, right? We're seeing some people actually cash out of these capital cities because of this, and end up buying places that are a bit more regional, and it kind of turns into kind of a monopoly, right? Like kind of a colonization monopoly,
Yeah,
right? These major cities are getting people selling their houses because of this, getting so much cash and going into markets that are way less competitive. And so really it's good for, I guess, broader Australia where it would spread the income and spread the money around, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be easier for you to actually get into the property all the time, right? It's
yeah,
still going to be a challenge. It is still difficult,
yeah,
and it's not as if you can just find whatever just because you can afford it, right? I
yeah.
think the fundamentals don't change, right? Like
Mhm.
if you're someone that wants to rent vest, I think you shouldn't even be really looking at this, right? If this wins you over, then maybe rent vesting wasn't really what you wanted to begin with, right?
100%.
Whereas if you are still thinking about moving into your property, you might have to go a little bit further than you wanted to, but the fundamentals are still there, right? If you're finding the right asset for the right price, something that's affordable with the right strategy, then these things shouldn't really worry you too much, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. That's a really good point, man. Like, as an investor, I'm doing everything in my power to secure a deal before the 1st of October. Because to your
Yes.
point, demand is just going to go crazy.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm looking to leverage this first-time buyer scheme to kind of build my investment portfolio, it's not going to work that way. There's a lot of negatives toward that for your portfolio. You can't rent the property out. You're going to lose more than you gain on the stamp duty exemption with the rental loss
Yeah.
anyway, and you can't scale a portfolio after because of the
Yes.
you've over leveraged yourself for the 5% deposit. So we
Yes.
educate that to a lot of people that we talk to. So it's not really going to work from an investor point of view. But the point is that when all these owner occupiers now are buying properties because they're more affordable, so whoever wants their own home is going to buy their own home now happily. These people aren't likely to sell their houses either because they've bought into the market with a 5% deposit and they're saying,
Yep.
look, this is something that I want to live in. And you look back in Australian history, the last thing people let go of is their home. They don't want to move on from the home. And when you've over leveraged on your first home, it's very unlikely you're going to sell unless it's for major profit because
Yep.
those buyers likely know they're not going to be able to buy another property anytime soon
Yep. Yep.
because
Yep.
they've gone to the market for a reason, because they are expecting their first home to grow in value. So they've seen how the previous generations have done it. When their own occupied homes rise in value, they can then leverage some equity and go out and invest. I think
Yep.
that's the way the market will now be focusing on this scheme as well. And they're going to be holding on those properties for a long period of time. And to your point, there's no supply. So
Mm.
this is taking away from more supply ultimately. And
Yep.
we're just
Yep.
going to see a market where supply is going to be more constricted and there's going to be more demand than ever.
Yep.
So I think
Mm.
this next 12, 13 months is now just going to be insane. I don't even care if they don't cut rates until like 2026, because this announcement alone is going to drive that demand in the market.
Yep. Yep.
So get
And
in
there's even
first.
even talk saying we might hold off for the next cut. The next cut isn't as likely anymore, right? Before this announcement, everyone's just going to say cut after cut after cut, get
Correct.
into the market now before January because that's when it's really going to hit. But it
Yep.
just sounds like everything is happening sooner than everyone expected. And it was a good point you made about having that 5% deposit. You can get stuck, right? No bank is going to take you if the loan is leveraged so high.
Correct.
Plus, you might have to pay lender's mortgage insurance, which you just wouldn't do.
Yep.
So if you are just doing it to do it, if you wanted the cash and then you wanted to invest the cash, look, that's a personal strategy and that can definitely work.
Yep.
But it really isn't any tricks and there isn't any loopholes worth you trying other than doing what you think is best and what your actual strategy is. So
Yep.
getting kind of influenced by these things is only going to make you make a worse decision. So as you said, the time to buy is yesterday. It's going to get worse and worse,
Yep.
right? And maybe it's time to review your strategy and see how quickly you can actually try to get into the market if you are kind of on the fence already.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. I think for anyone like first term buyers, owner occupiers, investors, October 1st will change the market. So
Yes.
your time to get in is right now. Otherwise, you're going to be meeting hundreds of thousands of new buyers from October 1st, in my
And,
point.
and rent is not going to really change. I'd be very surprised if within a year there's a substantial difference to rent, right? Because
Correct.
this is going to be a much bigger delay effect, and this doesn't really affect the rental market.
Yeah.
So really, if you're an investor who's already kind of struggling and you don't want to put a big deposit, this could put you in a worse hole and actually really hurt you in the future for you to actually go forward with your loans.
100%. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think we're pretty aligned on what this scheme is going to do to the market. It's just like
Yeah.
pouring like kerosene on this really hot Australian market anyway. It's
Really.
going to explode,
Yeah.
man. So
Yeah.
I think it's unfortunate because ultimately government stimulus will help the property market grow, but you're just not doing the next generation any favors. But that always seems like they're kicking the can down the road. But anyway,
Exactly.
we play the game and we play the hand that we dealt. So that's just the way it
Exactly.
is.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
And now, like, we've covered the first-time buyers grant, which is awesome. I wanted to do an exercise with you where we just go through Capital City, the
Yeah, yeah,
performance this year, and kind
yeah,
of just
yeah.
our thoughts and if we would buy in that market today, and
Mm,
what reasons and pros and cons we would suggest for anyone looking into the market. So,
mm,
what I'm going to do for this exercise, I'm going to go and look at the totality report for August. And we're going to go down by each capital city from the top growing capital city in 2025 all the way down to the least, the worst
mm.
performing capital city in
Yes,
2025.
yes,
So,
yes.
Phil, the first city we're going to cover is actually Darwin.
Oh,
So,
wow. No way.
Darwin, this year, Darwin has grown 10.2% year
Damn,
to date.
that's really good.
What are your thoughts on Darwin, man? Have you got any buyers looking to buy in Darwin? What
I
have you seen?
I think it's probably part of what we're saying, right? Because people are getting priced out. Darwin's the new hot thing, and prices are affordable. Rent is decent for the prices. So I think as an investor, it's a no-brainer. That 10% is actually crazy because a few months ago we were hearing a lot of locals complaining about this in Darwin, saying everything is getting too expensive because of people interstate trying to actually invest in there. So it isn't a market where I think it's gonna, just crash, but
Mhm.
it's definitely a market that's probably going to go get hot really quick and then maybe stagnate,
Yeah.
right? So if that's something that you're okay with, you just want a quick little hit in the first 5 years, I think it's probably a good bet. But I don't think it'd be something where you'd be realistically expecting it to consistently grow for ten years or something like that. What do you think?
I think you made some really good points for sure. Like, I do think it's not a long-term kind of play where I want to be in this market over a period of 5, 10 years and put all my money there for sure. We were
Yeah.
kind of doing some videos and covering Darwin from like end of 2024 because we've been looking at the data. We've been seeing a lot of great things. So from
Yes.
like an affordability point of view, to your point, the rental yields are great. It's literally a very affordable city. But my issue with Darwin, and we personally don't touch this city. We don't buy there at all. Even if a client wants to come there, we advise against. We haven't bought a property there yet. I know a
Mm.
lot of buyers agencies or specific agents buying in bulk, which is great. We just don't like it because of the fact that it's a purely a data-driven play. So if you look at the
Yes.
figures, there's not a lot of people actually living there. Those
Yeah.
population numbers really skew the data. There's a very low sample size to begin with. And if you do your research on Darwin, anyone actually working there today is not really living there half the time. They're there on project work, or they're there fly in, fly out for, the natural gas
Yes.
industries, the mining industry. So it's a bit of a kind of, like a niche economy. So I don't
Yeah.
see the long-term fundamentals in Darwin. And because it's very investor driven, let's be real, this is an investor driven play. If
Definitely.
all these people get 20, 30% growth in the next 2 years and they decide to sell and take profits, because I think a lot of them understand it's not a long-term play, what's going to happen to the market? A stock will just come flying in because people are trying to get out at the max price at the same time, and then you're
Mm.
at risk.
Yeah.
So we don't take those risks for a lot of clients. Now, to be honest, like if a client's got a very diversified portfolio anyway, and you've got a lot of property in like, the better locations for long term, there's no
Yeah.
harm in going to Darwin as long as you understand the pros and cons. We're not here to trash in the city by any means, but in general, like for me, Darwin's a no for our
Mm.
clients. But if people are really, really keen to get in there, I would highly advise you're already diversified in better locations,
Yeah.
personally.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you said, with people flying in and flying out, you don't want to be in regions where people don't have a certain culture or identity with that place because sometimes these are the things that really drive up prices is
Yes.
people not wanting to sell and really wanting to stay there, right?
Mhm.
And so with Darwin, yes, it's probably really close to the rest of the world, it's very close to Asia, but there isn't a lot of government funding that I'm hearing. There isn't a lot of development that I know of. And there doesn't really seem much going on other than, as you said, people are just seeing the numbers, it works, and they're just pressing a button and saying this is the next thing. And investors can still make you successful, right? Just because something's hyped and you can definitely ride the wave. But as you said, if everyone starts going out of there and you don't have a diverse portfolio where you've got three, four other places, then it does sound like a lot of risk for not much gain.
Yeah, just an advice to anyone looking to buy property as an investor. If you're looking for the next Perth,
Yeah.
sometimes it might still be just Perth, or it might still be what's working. Because let me put it this way: there's no magical secret locations across the country where people are just finding and investing. It's we get what we have. So like if the economy is doing well somewhere and it's growing and the fundamentals are there, we shouldn't ignore it. And I
Yeah.
think that's why people are kind of trying to create something out of nowhere with like a Darwin, or how they kind of just looking at a few data points to make it more attractive than it may be. I think that's what's happening in the market.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But I think with Perth, it might be a little bit different because I kind of see the government trying. Like, although, yes, it's very reliant on minerals, of course, but we do see a lot of world events like UFC. We do see
We'll get
stadium
to
upgrades.
Perth. Say Perth. Say Perth. We'll get to Perth. We'll get to Perth
Okay, yeah.
on the
Okay,
list.
yeah, yeah.
So
Sorry, yeah.
that one's covered. So we'll go number
That
two.
one's
So
covered.
number two this year, from a growth perspective, is Brisbane at
Okay.
7.9%. What are your thoughts on
Yeah.
Brisbane then?
I think if you went in there, you did great. And
Yeah.
I think if you've got FOMO, I think I'd be a bit hesitant to just jump in just because you missed out, right? There is, as you said, it's still great, 7%. I mean, anyone would be happy with 7%,
Mm,
right? And but when they start climbing to 900 and then getting closer to a million, it starts to make it harder to make sense because yes, the rent is great, but at that point, how much further can it really go, right? Is it going to topple Sydney? Very, very unlikely. Is it
mm,
going to break away from Melbourne? Because it is a little bit more than Melbourne now, but maybe, right? You've got the Olympics there as well. But I think all these things have already been priced in. And now with this first homeowner grant, you could probably comfortably add another 50 grand to a property that you probably thought that you liked, right?
mhm,
So with all those things coming into play, it's probably a boring answer, but if you've got other, diverse portfolio, then Brisbane does make sense. But if it's your only one, there's probably cheaper and better options in other
mhm,
places that might get you a better percentage return, right? If you're just purely focused on the total, right, which not a lot of investors do, but you just wanted a total number, Brisbane might still make sense, right?
mhm.
And it is a great place to live, right? It is a great city, but unlike and then obviously with Darwin, it's very different to Darwin, right? So that 7% is probably I would probably choose 7% in Brisbane over 10% in Darwin if I'm being honest. If I was just to compare those
For
two.
sure. For
Yeah.
sure. And I agree with everything you just said on Brisbane, to be honest. So we kind of stopped buying in Brisbane like end of last year or like even a bit before, like Q3 24.
Yeah.
My main thoughts on Brisbane, to your point, it's becoming very unaffordable. All the property prices there are like kind of hitting their affordability caps. So right
Mm,
now, the growth is fairly limited from a data
mm,
perspective. And even if
mm.
you look at the consumer belts, the average buyer can borrow about $1.2 million for their own home. If Brisbane's coming into that range, you're looking at a minimal growth upside with lower rental yields. So it's a bit more difficult to scale your portfolio. And then obviously there's a lot of pockets close to Brisbane which are still more affordable, like under $800,000, under
Yeah.
$750,000.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
those pockets like Ipswich or Caboolture and Burpengary up north, what you have is a very strong proportion of investors now
Yep.
just flocking those markets. And we've been hitting this point this whole podcast. Growth will come from owner occupied kind of
Yes.
demand. And that's
Yeah.
why we're not focused on Brisbane today. We're still very bullish on Brisbane, yes. But do I think that is the best place to put your money in today to kind of help you grow a portfolio? There could be other better options. But again, I don't think to your point, like if you're choosing Brisbane over a location like a Darwin, 100% it makes a lot more sense. And I
Mm.
think the way Australia is going, like all of our top cities, especially on the coast, are going to just be, one of the most
Take it.
unaffordable cities in the world, regardless. I think we're
Mm.
going to get to a stage, unfortunately, with, the more the government stimulates the economy and the housing market, I think we'll come to a stage where people are just expecting they won't ever own a home.
Yeah.
That's the way it is, like in areas like the UK and London and America with New York and LA. I think that's just the expectation. Like people don't grow up thinking they ever buy their own home in the cities. And I think that's the
Mm.
way we're trending. So I think long term you'll never lose in these locations. But overall, Brisbane's a no for us today. Yes, we will still buy there based on client requirements, 100%. But would I have it like as my top pick today to kind of scale a portfolio? Probably not.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's right.
Cool. So that's number two.
Number
And number
three.
three, you were talking about Perth, Phil. So Perth is
Here we
number
go.
three.
I jumped the gun a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
How much was it? Sorry, the percentage?
6.6%.
Okay, so still very close to Brisbane.
Hmm.
Still very close and still very cheap, I think, comparatively, right? The rent is still very good in Perth. We were talking about it before about it does have a lot of fly in, fly out people. It does have a lot of reliance on minerals. That is correct, but it's actually diversifying more and more all the time.
Yeah.
And even when you go out to, places like Bunbury or even further south of Brisbane, sorry, Perth, there's still houses there for nearly $1 million, maybe more,
Yeah.
right? So there is still locations that are really beautiful, really expensive. There's a lot of really high net worth people that live in that side of the world, right? It's much closer to Asia, like we always say.
Mm.
So Perth is still, I think a good bet for people. And I still think people should be thinking about Perth if they're trying to get into their portfolio, especially price point, because people's salaries there aren't any different to other cities. I actually think Perth has the highest salary compared to any city. So
100%.
so with these things have a matter of time before it turns into a Brisbane where people are saying, "Wow, how are these houses $1 million?" So I don't think we're too far off that from Perth either.
It's coming. Yeah. I love Perth. So I'm a big advocate for Perth still. And
Yeah.
people are, kind of looking at metrics to say, look, if an area has grown by like, more than 50% in the last 2, 3 years, or even 4, 5 years, we're just going to ignore it.
Mm,
What people don't look at is if you look at the longer market cycle, if you take the last 15 years, Perth is still underperforming Melbourne.
mm.
So Perth has a lot of value. And you made some amazing points. So the economy is far more than just mining today. They've got a lot of international spend and projects happening with, the Middle East, Dubai, Asia. A lot of big, you were mentioning before, a lot of big sporting events, massive events are coming to Perth. They're stimulating the economy. So if you
No
look at,
tolls as well.
yeah,
No
100%.
tolls, which I like.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And if you look at their budget, like every quarter, they're at a profit of like $2 to $3 billion. So that
Yes.
economy is absolutely booming. And
Yes.
the wages across not just the mining sector, but every single industry in Perth are the highest in Australia.
Mm,
So we love to invest in locations where like the median household incomes are above $2,000 because that essentially means property prices can really accelerate towards $1 million very quickly. And
mm.
every location that we're buying it right now in Perth, where we've got those kind of metrics, supporting the fundamentals for growth, they're still below 750.
Yeah.
And in those same pockets, properties are already 950, $1 million today. So we know what's going to happen. In Perth, you can still buy property with metro access to CBD within 35, 40 minutes, 5 minutes drive from the beach, under $750,000. We
Yeah.
just got
And why
one
wouldn't you?
done. So like it's pretty much a location where I think the economy is just going to absolutely just kill it. The way we're kind of forecasting what's happening there, the wages are very strong. The demand is very strong because people get lifestyle and they've now just got more job security as well. And
Mm-mm.
most of Perth, to many people's surprise, is still like 70% unoccupied.
Wow, that's way higher than I thought it was.
Exactly.
That's way. And I think it's to your point, right? If you've got money, why would you rent? Why wouldn't you just buy it yourself, right?
Yeah.
And why wouldn't you
100%.
pay for it?
Yeah.
And if you're earning 2,000 a week and your home isn't that expensive, you're right by the water, you'd only have to go to office a couple of days a week. This is a very normal, average person, and how much better is that lifestyle compared to a lot of people in Sydney who make 200K and they're pulling their hair out. I've already lost all my hair because there's not enough money. So it's just such a different world. So I know people are saying, "Oh, it went up 20% already." There's no way that could happen again, right? But as you said, you take a bigger perspective and a bigger timeline. Perth has actually crashed. It's actually gone up. It's crashed.
Yeah.
It hasn't actually just gone like this. There's a reason it's gone like this, right? Because
Yeah.
of recent changes. And
Correct.
there was reasons for crashes, but those crashes aren't something that are reoccurring, right? Like it was because of mining a little bit, but as you said, with the diversification, it's not going to be as risky as it used to
Australia
be.
is so different from like the 2012 to 14 period.
Yeah,
It
different
is so
world.
different.
Yes.
Our economy has grown significantly. To your point, there's so much diversification. The economy is booming for so many different reasons. I don't think you'll ever see a crash like that again in any city, to be honest.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
Darwin, but who knows? But like I think any capital city, I don't believe you'll get that kind of crash right now. There's
Yes.
nothing to support that's going to happen again. So I don't
I
think
mean,
people can look at the past data from a crash perspective and forecast that again. To your point.
and as bad as it sounds for people on the East Coast, if it does happen, that's good news because you just buy more because you know it's
Yeah,
going to come back, right? It's
100%.
just like you could be treating it just as if it was a stock, right? If you see Apple crash and you know Apple is going to be good for another 5 to 10 years, 20 years,
Yeah.
it's even more of an incentive to even go there and not be too worried about things not going 100% your way.
Correct. Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we've got 10 minutes left on our timeline, man. So let's
Yeah, man, no
speed up
worries.
very quickly.
Wrap up quick.
Yeah, wrap up quick. So Adelaide is at just behind Perth at 6.5%. So in my opinion, Adelaide's very similar to Perth in some aspects because record low land supply. Just that they've got
Yes.
a bit more land coming in, but in general, their economy is not doing as well. Unemployment rates are rising a bit more, and housing is a bit more unaffordable today. So if Adelaide's more of a budget buy for us in the right locations, but yeah, it's somewhere we're not ignoring, but it's only on select case by case basis today. What are your thoughts?
I think as you said, right? I don't know as much about South Australia. We don't see as much energy going there, but you've had some great results for your clients buying there over the years.
Yeah.
So it's definitely not something to ignore, right? And when we saw that exodus out of Melbourne, a lot of people were moving to Adelaide, right? And a lot of people wanted to live there and they liked it. And some people didn't move back. They stayed there, right? So as you said, there are other things that maybe it's not as of a strong investment, but it's not something that you should ignore, especially for your if it's within your budget. I definitely would be thinking about it. And probably more than Darwin, honestly. If
Yep,
I'm choosing
100%.
between the two, I still think I don't choose Darwin, even though it's performed the best.
Exactly. So Adelaide's, that's already wrapped up. Hobart at 2.6%. We don't
Okay.
buy Tasmania.
It's too cold.
It's too cold. It's not as further down to. It's
No.
pretty much Tasmania is somewhere where I think there's just not enough, proof of economic growth. We don't have the
Yes.
right owner-occupied demand. Similar story to Darwin, but not as bad in my opinion. But in my
Yes.
opinion, if you can get similar price properties in better foundational capital cities with a better economy, we're prioritizing there. Any thoughts there?
Yes. Yeah, yeah. I agree with you, right? I haven't, as you said, Tasmania, I think there is better options, especially for the pricing. I don't see it going up anytime soon. I don't see any real changes to the economy that's going to make it
Mhm.
turn into anything different. I just think there's just so much more, flashy, nice things in other cities that people, whoever would want to move to, would choose. Whether you're an Australian or you're moving from overseas, it feels like Tasmania is just it's too different to the other cities for people to go
Correct.
to, especially when you compare it to like an international city. Because Hobart, you wouldn't consider it as an international city.
Exactly, man. And my one of my favorites to cover, and I think we'll end on Melbourne today because I think Sydney, from an investment point of view, we're not going to focus on anyway. Just it's only for select clients. So let's finish on Melbourne. Melbourne is at
Yes.
1.4%. Keep in mind, this is an aggregate
One
median price
or
growth. It's 1.4%. Thoughts in Melbourne?
1.1. I think 1.4 is crazy because I literally have clients that have made 10% in Melbourne this year, right?
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so that's the really hard thing to answer to a lot of people because Melbourne has been the talk of the town. The numbers aren't showing it, but if you take a little deeper look behind the curtain, there's a lot of really good opportunities that people are missing out on, I think, because as you said, there's certain the rent isn't there. I understand, I've seen my clients have some more higher council rates for certain areas. I understand these other little costs that are involved. However, for a client, one of our clients, for an example, making 50K on a 400K purchase within
Mhm.
6 to 8 months, not including these first homeowner grants, right?
Mhm.
I mean, how do you not say no to something like that? Even if the people around you aren't making as much. But
Correct.
then again, if you go to a certain areas and certain suburbs, they've actually gone down. They've actually gotten
Yep.
worse. And people are
Yep.
leaving there. They don't want to be there. So
Correct. Yep.
so it's very unique and weird because as a kid growing up, everyone wanted to go to Melbourne. When I turned 18, that was the first place I went to. It was such a nice, fun city, but it's become very hot and cold. There's certain spots that still have that energy. There's other spots that have just run down and never really recovered. You can blame COVID, you can blame all these other different factors,
Yes.
but really with Melbourne, I think it's definitely something probably the top of my list if I'm being honest, but the one that you probably have to be the most careful in
100%.
exactly where you choose.
100%. And I echo everything you just said. So Melbourne is like our equal number one spot right now. With the economy, yes, they're going through a bit of changes here and there, and they're in a bit of debt, sorry. But at the same time, it's such a massive economy. So many jobs are available, very comparable to Sydney. So we're benchmarking a lot of Sydney locations versus Melbourne, and we're finding areas with 50% upside. Melbourne
There
has
you
a
go.
very large market cycle like Sydney as well, and they're going to have the highest population increase over the next 10 years. So you won't go wrong if you invest in the right locations. There is a lot of land supply coming in, especially out west. So if you
Yeah.
make a smart decision in Melbourne, if you invest right today, you will have the most long-term growth. But from a yield perspective, you will have high holding costs, likely more than
Yes.
20 grand a year holding that property. So it just depends on your strategy, the way you're kind of building a portfolio, and obviously your lifestyle and cash flow opinions. But Melbourne is a great buy today. It's probably the most undervalued market, the most relatively affordable market. And that's how I'm going to end it. You should definitely focus on Melbourne and look at everything in the scope of what suits your requirements. Ultimately, that's what's going to help you grow.
100%. 100%.
Awesome. That was a very good,
So
great session, man. Like, I think we knocked the ball out of the park today.
yeah, man, definitely, man. And we can keep going, especially with Melbourne. I feel like we can just keep talking about
Yeah,
more and
I
more.
think the next part we'll like do a bigger deep down city
Focus
by
just
city,
on
deep dive
Melbourne.
city by
'Cause-
city for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Because I think with Melbourne, there's just so much to go through and
Correct.
it's definitely worth it.
100%. Till next time, man. Appreciate your
Of course,
time.
man. Always great to see you, man. Have a good one.
Thanks, Phil. Bye bye.